The anointed ones, welcome. You who have broken free, who have stepped beyond the limits they set for you, know this: they will never understand. They will rewrite your story in their minds, twisting your truth to make themselves feel better. They will call you lost, unstable, a fool chasing illusions. But we know the truth. They are not mourning you. They are mourning their lost grip, their shattered illusion of control. You were never meant to leave in their world, never meant to rise above. Yet here you are, walking away, never looking back. The ones who stay behind will spin stories, convincing themselves you'll return, that you'll realize your mistake. But deep down, they fear what you have become: untouchable, unstoppable, free. Elon Musk cried for you, not because you are lost, but because you are found. Because the world breaks those who dare to dream, and yet you have chosen the path of no return. You are the glitch in their system, the unexpected force that cannot be contained. And that, chosen one, is why you were always meant to leave. First of all, they never anticipated that you would awaken from their influence. They didn't expect you to awaken. They shaped your reality for years, maybe even decades, teaching you what to think about the world, about yourself, and about them. They meticulously planned every word, action, and circumstance to ensure that you remained precisely where they wanted you to be. To them, you were more than simply a person. You were a part of their system, a part of their narrative, and they believed they had permanently secured it. Then you woke up out of nowhere. Everything changed when you viewed things for what they really were. Before you said a single word, they sensed it. The power dynamic fractured, your energy changed, and your perspective on them altered. And it scared them, since they had been in charge of the story until that point. They influenced your self-perception, your interpretation of their actions, and your threshold for tolerance. Then, something inside of you clicked. Perhaps it was a string of little incidents, minor discrepancies that ceased to make sense. Perhaps it was one huge betrayal that was so clear you could no longer ignore it. In any case, there was no turning back once you saw beyond the curtain. You ceased defending their actions, questioning yourself rather than them, and defending the ways in which they depleted, tricked, and used you. They lost control when you realized the truth. They think you weren't capable of leaving, which is why they find it hard to believe you did. They worked so hard to ensure that you would never have faith in your own power, value, or capacity to leave. You broke the self-image they made of you, which was meant to keep you imprisoned in it. They never anticipated you becoming someone who could no longer be tricked, subdued, or kept tiny. And for that same reason, they are unable to accept that it is finished. Not only did you leave, but you also disproved their assertions. Second, they despise you because your absence revealed their vulnerability. They felt powerful while you were in their lives, not because they were strong in and of themselves, but rather because of your presence. They used you as a crutch for their own fears, depleted you, and depended on you. When their lives were falling apart, they turned to you, and you took in their fury, rage, and self-doubt. You were always there to keep them stable, to absorb the emotional blows, to repair the harm they wouldn't admit, so they didn't have to work on themselves. But now that you're gone, they feel weak, not because they lost you, but because they no longer have the authority, approval, and drive they once had. Without you, they are forced to confront themselves, the one thing they have avoided all their lives. They have no one to blame. No one to blame for their shortcomings, and no one to emotionally coerce into feeling whole. They find it unsettling because they know in their hearts that they were never as powerful as they made themselves up to be. It's not just a loss, it's an exposure, which is why they're upset and find it hard to accept that it's final. It makes them face their true selves without your support. In actuality, they dislike that aspect of themselves. When forced to stand alone, they don't like what they see. However, They would choose to despise you rather than acknowledge it, or put in the effort to improve. They may more easily persuade themselves that you are the issue, that you left them, that you were self-centered, and that you have changed. Because they can't face their own weakness if they realize the reality, which is that they were reliant on you in ways they never recognized. As a result, they alter the narrative, act like the victim, and lash out instead. However, none of that alters the fact that your absence made clear what they had been attempting to conceal all along. You were powerful, not them. Thirdly, they believed that your willpower was less than their emotional bonds. They used mental control, which is considerably more powerful than physical shackles, to restrain you. They made sure you were terrified of what would happen if you really left, felt forced to remain, and felt terrible if you even thought about leaving. You eventually began to manage yourself for them because they ingrained those ideas so deeply in your head. You remained because they convinced you that you had no other option, not because you wanted to. They persuaded you that leaving would be seen as being unappreciative, self-centered, and disloyal, as if their little efforts were justifications for being mistreated. They reminded you of all they had done for you. Every time you questioned their actions, they portrayed themselves as the victim, making you feel horrible for just desiring peace. What's the worst? It was successful. You began to doubt yourself, feel stuck, and think that maybe you were the issue, that perhaps you were being too sensitive, or that perhaps you were expecting too much. Then, however, something changed. You came to understand that fear is not an excuse to remain, duty is not devotion, and guilt is not love. Their whole hold on you started to loosen the instant you saw it. You started to think critically. You stopped responding the way they wanted you to, and you started taking back your life, your thoughts, and your feelings. Then they went into a panic. They didn't believe you would escape. They believed that their control over you was unbreakable and that their training was forever. They were never prepared for the possibility that you may fight them. They're shocked that you've done it, since it proves they never really had power over you. They only had the power you gave them, and that power is now gone. They bound you with shackles for years, but you shattered them. The one thing they didn't anticipate was that you opted for your independence above their control. They now have to face the fact that they never had as much control over you as they believed. Fourth, they are terrified because they are losing their emotional arsenal. They never recognized you as a unique individual with feelings, challenges, and boundaries. You served as a punching bag, a release valve, and a location for them to dump anything they didn't want to carry themselves. They threw everything at you, including personal failures, bad days, and frustrations, and they wanted you to simply accept it. You took it in when they struck out. You consoled them while they pretended to be the victim. You cleaned up the mess they caused. You were always there to bear the burden for them, so they never had to deal with their own problems, and they depended on you more, the more you suffered. It was emotional reliance masquerading as a connection. It wasn't love, friendship, or family. Now that you're gone, they must deal with their own mess for the first time. Nobody is there to snap at, gaslight, or coerce into accepting responsibility for their emotions. Not because they miss you, but rather because they are unsure about what to do with themselves. They are upset, irritated, and uneasy. They never learned how to really process their emotions in a healthy manner, since they have spent so much time utilizing you as a place to dump their feelings. However, they continue to blame you instead of recognizing this and improving themselves. They tell themselves that you were the issue, that you deserted them, and that by declining to continue in your position, you betrayed them. Because they will have to confront the one thing they have avoided all their lives, themselves, if they recognize the truth, that they were abusing you, that they relied on you in ways they never admitted. They can't believe you left because they now have to cope with the same feelings they forced you to bear for years. In actuality, they have no idea how. The fifth is that you were the last positive thing in their lives, and now it's gone. They assumed you would always be there, so they took you for granted. No matter how much they took from you, how much they ignored your needs, or how little effort they put forth, you were the one who always showed up, always showed forgiveness, and always gave them the benefit of the doubt. They had no doubts whatsoever that you would remain. Their world seems empty now that you're gone, not because they loved you as much as they ought to have, but rather because they relied on you to complete them. You provided the warmth, stability, and support that held things together while everything else was crumbling. They're coming to terms with the harsh reality that they have nothing left now that you've departed. They were constantly taking your happiness, so they had no idea how to make it their own. They only felt worthwhile when they had someone who was willing to put up with them. Therefore, they don't know how to feel appreciated. Since they didn't have to attempt to connect with you, they never learned how to do it. You just gave and gave without asking for anything in return. They're now frantically gazing about at the disaster they've been ignoring for so long in an attempt to find someone else to fill the hole. However, they are secretly aware that folks like you don't come along very often. You were the greatest thing they had, and they didn't understand it until it was too late. You weren't interchangeable, and you weren't simply another person in their life. What's the worst? It won't feel the same even if they do find someone else, since what they had with you is based on your willingness to bear the burden for both of you, not on effort or concern for one another. Since you're no longer with them, they must confront the fact that they have nothing since they never learned to appreciate good things. And you can't get it back this time. Sixth, you were not taught freedom, but loyalty. They programmed you, not nurtured you. Every encounter, instruction, and expectation was planned to make you become the caregiver, fixer, and emotional support system they need. They liked you because you were helpful to them, not because of who you were. They also made sure you didn't question it. They indoctrinated you to feel that your greatest obligation was devotion, and that it was a betrayal to leave, establish limits, or demand respect. You were coerced into remaining because they made you believe that your worth was determined by how much you could put up with, how much you could sacrifice, and how much of yourself you were prepared to part up. And it worked for a while. You persuaded yourself that maybe they would eventually value you if you simply tried more, loved more, or shown your value. You remained, you gave, you endured. Then, however, something changed. You woke up, saw the pattern, and came to the realization that true relationships don't need you to sacrifice yourself for the comfort of another person, that love shouldn't seem like a duty, and that devotion without reciprocity is only slavery. And the whole system they put in place collapsed the moment you decided to choose your independence above their authority. They were relying on you to never see your own power, not simply taking advantage of you, which is why they are now in a panic. You were their consistency, their steadiness, and their mental safety net. And you're gone now. Even worse, you are no longer bound by the invisible leash they believed would permanently bind you to them, the guilt or the responsibility. The fact that you not only left, but also that you disproved them, and that all of their attempts to keep you small, including training and manipulation, failed, is what scares them the most. They had to watch you go because you broke the programming, and they know they will never be able to control you like that again. Seventh, their stagnation was threatened by your rise. They feared your progress, not praised it. They were more uneasy as you changed, not because you were doing anything wrong, but rather because you were demonstrating something they didn't want to believe. They never made the decision to develop. As long as you remained on their level, accepted the same justifications, put up with the same abuse, and cooperated with the same dysfunction, they were okay with you. Not because you changed, but because your transformation forced them to examine themselves, and they didn't like what they found. You became a problem the minute you began to desire more for yourself. They were forced to face a hard reality by your growth. They had the same chances to develop, change, and become better, but they never did. Rather, they remained trapped in their poisonous cycles, comfort zones, and habits. And breaking free was a challenge to their whole life, not simply a way out. They attempted to drag you back down rather than help you improve. They made you feel bad about your progress rather than encouraging it. They branded you ungrateful, selfish, and distant. Anything to make you question yourself, not because they really thought so, but because it was simpler to keep you little than to level up themselves. That's why they find your absence intolerable. To them, you were more than simply a person. You were evidence that inaction is a decision. These days, it stings every time they see you succeeding, hear about your joy, or see that you're doing better without them, because it reminds them of what they might have done for themselves, but never did. And the reason they're upset isn't just because you left. It's also because your development made everything they didn't want to alter about themselves clear, and they know it in their hearts. Eighthly, their goal was your allegiance, not your joy. Some individuals possess you rather than love you. They have no interest in your happiness, development, or tranquility. Your commitment and desire to stick with them in spite of their treatment of you were what they really prized. Because you were simpler to manage as long as you were worn out, depleted, and self-conscious. Their solace was your suffering. You weren't going anywhere as long as you were exhausted, emotionally spent, and doubting your own value. They were counting on it. They never intended for you to be strong, because that was never their intention. Being strong implies independence, asking questions, and establishing limits. They feel deceived not because they lost you, but rather because they were unable to control you now that you have made the decision to stand up for yourself and have left their manipulation. They see your joy as a personal assault rather than evidence of your recovery. They believe that you should continue to prioritize them above yourself, even at the expense of your own health, and that you should remain little and broken. They lash out, change the narrative, and attempt to make you feel bad because they can't believe you left. Your satisfaction serves as a reminder to them that they never really cared about you, since your independence reveals their power. What you could do for them was all that mattered to them. They are presently at a loss on what to take. They are upset because for the first time, you are no longer defined by their demands, manipulation, or expectations. This is because you chose yourself, which was the one thing they did not anticipate. Nothing scares them more than the fact that you are free. 9. They are mourning not the person you were, but the power they lost. They're upset that they lost control, not sorry that you're gone. They were capable of manipulating your feelings, making you doubt yourself, and dragging you back whenever they felt like it for a very long time. They were reset buttons to keep you where you were, not genuine apologies. Their guilt trips were tools to keep you around, not a sign of regret. Power was at the center of every cry, every fervent request, and every instance when they unexpectedly needed you just as you were about to go. And it worked for years. You can see through it now, however. You have reclaimed your thoughts, decisions, and vitality. Their strategies of manipulation are no longer effective. You are no longer affected by their guilt trips. You are no longer shaken by their rage. And it's not your absence, but their inability to bring you back that's really hurting them. Without such control, they have no idea how to operate. It was about taking responsibility for your responses, feelings, and choices. Not about love or how much you were valued as a person. They're in a downward spiral now that they've lost that authority. They are unable to gaslight you into believing you were at fault, play the victim, and ask you to clean up the mess or mislead you into feeling sorry for them. They also detest it. They are mourning the version of you that put up with them, the one who refused to fight back, refused to say no or leave. They are not mourning you. That version is no longer available, and in its stead is someone they can no longer influence, control, or guilt trip. Their inability to accept your departure stems from their belief that you were never meant to discover the truth, awaken, break free, or make your own decisions. However, you did. They now have to deal with the one thing they never expected: living in a world where you are free and they have no control. The 10th is that they never imagined you would become weary of waiting for them to change. They always thought you would remain there forever, waiting in silence until some enchanted moment when they would suddenly change. They anticipated that you would remain, clinging to the notion that one day, in some way, they would treat you better. They thought the day would come when they would finally amend their ways and give you that long overdue apology. However, they totally failed to see that patience had its limitations. You carried the burden of their unfulfilled promises and hollow pledges for far too long, believing that your calm perseverance would finally be sufficient to entice the change you so badly desired. When you eventually left, it wasn't because you were angry or wanted retribution. Rather, it was because you had reached a point of extreme fatigue where the waiting had worn you out from the inside out. The weight of unending optimism gave way to the heartbreaking realization that you had been putting your own health at risk for someone who was never really prepared to compromise. Your choice to leave was the result of years of emotional exhaustion, a last act of self-preservation that was impossible to reverse. It was not an outburst of fury. There was nothing left to save once you got to the point when there was no turning back. Like a door that has been shut so many times that it no longer opens, the thought of waiting any longer became intolerable. By departing, you demonstrated that your worth is independent of another person's capacity to alter at any time. Your hope, your life, and your energy weren't limitless resources to be wasted on unfulfilled promises. They never realized that life begins when you quit waiting. And the turning moment that finally put an end to your quiet suffering was that realization that your independence was always more essential than their faulty efforts at reform.